Welcome to our continued video lectures on The Merchant of Venice. We are now into Act 5, the final act of the play. So how are we going to look at this? Well, it's the end of the play, so it's a comedy, right? Yeah, it's a comedy. We forgot that. All's well that ends well in a comedy, right? Everything's going to end up just fine as we expect to happen in a comedy. Well, we'll see that because there's a question mark here on this play because remember, this is a problem play. We've talked about winners and losers through the previous acts. So let's just kind of look at that to start. Bassanio wins? Question mark. Does he? Gratiano? Not so sure. Lorenzo and Jessica? They most certainly win, right? Or do they? Portia? I think we can say with relative assuredness that Portia wins. No question about it. Portia wins. Antonio? Don't know. Does he win? So let's take a look at this act, a very brief act, as is common with Shakespearean plays. Act 5, Shakespeare likes to wrap up his plays quickly. Once the rising action has all occurred, we move pretty quickly into conclusion, and Merchant of Venice is no exception to that. All the loose ends are tied up, and they're generally tied up very, very quickly, and this is what we will see. So as we begin Act 5, we jump into Scene 1. It's the only scene in this act. We are back over in Belmont, and that's where we will finish the play. And as the play begins, as Act 5 begins, we see Jessica and Lorenzo together, and I look at it as kind of a transition scene because everybody's coming back from Venice and they aren't all there yet. If you remember, Lorenzo and Jessica had stayed behind. Portia had given essentially the keys to the kingdom to Lorenzo to be in charge of the house while they were gone. Lorenzo and Jessica thought, of course, that uh, Portia and Nerissa were going to a monastery to await the return of their husbands. We, of course, know that's not what happened. And so this is a transition type scene, and we see the two of them speaking again. And remember, the last time we saw them speaking, they were speaking sweet words together, back and forth to each other in tremendous prose, and that will continue. The words are interesting, though, and I put it as sharp poetic words describing the night. Very, very specific words. They're together, and it's an evening, and they are describing the night that they're experiencing together, what the night is like. And so they both try to one up each other in describing what tonight is like. But the things that they compare the night to are interesting. As it begins, you've got the description. The night is being compared to Troilus scaling the walls of Troy, looking for Cressida, his love, who actually has ultimately fled. She has fled Troy. In fact, she's run into the arms of her Greek lover, and she is going to stay with her Greek lover. And so we see this as a comparison to that. I don't know. That's not a very good night, I don't think, for Troilus, anyways. There's a comparison next to this is like the night that Pyramus and Thisbe met as they tried to escape their houses. And of course, remember, Pyramus and Thisbe both die. Remember, Jessica has stolen away from her father's house, right? But the comparison, this is the night like Pyramus and Thisbe, is not a great comparison. Also, the next thing it gets compared is the comparison to the night that Medea restored old Aeson to his youth. The story has a lot of components to it, but suffice it to say that this mythological story is pretty vicious in the end. Certainly, Medea's behavior is. So it's not a great story. And then Lorenzo also compares this night to the night that Jessica stole from her father. She stole away from her father, and she stole the jewels from her father. He doesn't mention, by the way, that he also stole that night. He stole Jessica from the father. Jessica then suggests that, on a night like this, Lorenzo had made false promises. Lorenzo says that she slanders him, but they forgive each other. And they really do this in jest back and forth. But it's really kind of fascinating, the types of things that they're comparing the night to, because none of them were very, very good. And they're speaking this all in great fun, right? Maybe they are. But Shakespeare's putting in front of us things that either didn't start well or didn't end well, which obviously has to beg the question: what is the Jessica and Lorenzo relationship all about anyway? Where's the truth there? What are we to make of all this? But again, it's a transition scene as we're waiting for Portia and Nerissa to return, and we're waiting for Bassanio to return as well. Continues a little bit, and we see that Lorenzo is ordering music to be played because he hears that Portia is coming home. And so he has the folks, the band, strike up some music to play Portia's music. And as the music is playing, Jessica says the lines on line 76, "I am never merry when I hear sweet music." And what does she mean by this? What might we be able to infer about Jessica's statement? Why is she never merry when she hears sweet music? Here's a picture of the actress who plays the role of Jessica in the film from 2004. And you can see this is kind of her look, right? She's always a little melancholy as well. So, I'm never merry when I hear sweet music. What might we be able to infer about this? Well, here's what I think is going on here. And I think it's the difference between Christian music and Jewish music. And there is a difference. There's a different style of playing music. Many traditional Jewish songs of celebration are played in what's called the Jewish mode, which is, as far as the scale is concerned, it's called the Phrygian dominance scale. And I thought I'd play for you the what that scale sounds like. And this is what the Phrygian dominance scale sounds like. Kind of haunting, isn't it? That's the scale that's actually used at the first part of the Ave Nagila, which is a song of celebration. But it's definitely uses some interesting tonal qualities with it. Would you call it sweet music? Perhaps not. Perhaps you wouldn't. Nonetheless, this is what you would typically hear from. This is typically what you would hear from Jewish music. I'm going to contrast that with what would be typically we would call. So I'm going to pause the phone, as we would typically consider music for the Christians. And the Christians use what's called a major scale. And let me play for you what a major scale sounds like. Well, there's your major scale, right? Your major scale there's some sweetness to it, right? Because this is the scale that gets used typically in the Christian music. And so when we take a look at what Jessica says, which is, "I'm never merry when I hear sweet music," might she be referring to the fact that she's listening to Christian music and it doesn't make her merry? Well, if that's the case, and we keep in mind the fact that she has switched faiths, might we be able to read into this perhaps that she's not happy that she has converted to Christianity? I don't know. It's quite possible. And then if she's not happy about converting to Christianity, is she in love with Lorenzo? She might be. Is it the reason she left Shylock? Well, maybe the reason she left Shylock then has something to do with Shylock and not necessarily Lorenzo. But an interesting use of music, I think, we see here, or references to music in Act 5. The rest of the scene is really focuses on what's called the ring trick, and we talked about this at the end of Act 4. And here's the ring trick, right? Portia and Nerissa know that the rings are gone, and it just seems to be a matter of how long it's going to take for Bassanio and Gratiano to come clean with the fact that, hey, we gave away our rings. And that's really what we're waiting for in Act 5. And what happens is Gratiano and Nerissa enter in the midst of an argument. They're quarreling about this, and and Portia and Nerissa had already planned this. Their plan is to make their husbands squirm. Well, then they knew this was going to happen, right? And so they've really set the husbands up here to have to squirm, to look bad, right? And in fact, when they're arguing, and Portia says, "Oh, what's going on? You having an argument so soon in your marriage?" And then when Gratiano says, "An argument's about nothing, about a paltry hoop of gold," he says. And Portia lets Gratiano know how wrong he was to give away his wife's first gift so easily. The words, of course, are for Bassanio to hear. Right? She says those words so Bassanio hears them. Right? And pretty much right away, when Portia says, "My husband, I gave him a ring, and he would never part with it," Gratiano very quickly rats him out. A violation of the bro code, if there is one. Right? You can't do this. He rats out. He rats out his friend Bassanio. "My lord Bassanio gave his ring away." Really? Yep, that's what he did. And so now Bassanio can't escape, right? And he has to try to explain why he gave the ring away, but it certainly comes up short with it. Here are his words. "Sweet Portia, if you did know to whom I gave the ring, if you did know for whom I gave the ring, and would conceive for what I gave the ring, and how unwillingly I left the ring, when naught would be accepted but the ring, you would abate the strength of your displeasure." Right? He's saying anything at this point, right? But the truth is that Portia was in the courtroom, which he doesn't know yet, right? And she knows the truth. She knows exactly what happened. And keep in mind this, she didn't hear this part, but Antonio tells Bassanio that he shouldn't value his wife's commandment over their relationship. And ultimately, that's why Bassanio gives the ring back. He's pressured by Antonio to do so. And he does. Portia sets him straight. Great lines, she says, immediately following his lines. And she actually parallels his lines. She says them in the same way he says his. "If you had known the virtue of the ring, or half her worthiness that gave the ring, or your own honor to contain the ring, you would not then have parted with the ring." Marcus Cicero, honor is the reward of virtue, right? Portia, just like Brutus's wife from Julius Caesar, she's virtuous. We know that, right? She's the one who is going to, come hell or high water, she is going to make sure that she upholds the will of her dead father, even though she may not like it, right? There's virtue. This is Portia. She's speaking true words. If you had known the virtue of the ring, if you had known how virtuous a person Portia is, you would not have done this. Those words are true, right? She speaks them. She needs him to hear those words. And once he hears it, then you've got some levity that's going to occur, right? Because you've got Portia now and Nerissa who are going to continue to play the trick, and they're going to insinuate that the two of them got rings from from the doctor and the clerk, and it's all a big ruse. Um, and it's fun, right? The audience will laugh through that part. But Portia knows that she needs to insert herself at this point as number one in Antonio's life. And that there's an Antonio-Bassanio relation that's very, very close. She saw it in the courtroom. She saw Antonio profess the depth of his love to Bassanio. And she saw what Bassanio does for Antonio. And that while this is fine, because this all occurred before the marriage, there will be no room for a third person in this marriage. And she's going to make it very, very clear that it is me, it is Portia that you will put your attention to now, not Antonio. He pleads, right, with Portia that she can trust Bassanio. And Antonio, offers himself as a sacrifice again. And he says, I promise you, your husband will never, on my word, your husband will never go against you again. And so what she does is she pulls out a ring and she gives it to Antonio, and she makes Antonio present the wedding ring back to Bassanio. Now, Bassanio doesn't know at this moment that's the actual ring, right? but she makes Antonio hand it to him. And I love the way that it is actually framed in the film, because what you have is you have Antonio walking over to Bassanio and presenting him with a wedding ring. And it's very interestingly framed in the film. It almost seems as though you've got Antonio presenting a wedding ring to Bassanio. And this is what Portia perhaps is trying to break up, perhaps. But very, very well framed in the film. And so he recognizes the ring. He says, wait a minute, this is the ring. This is how did you get the ring? And more levity ensues, and some very low humor ensues about that. But what you get at this moment is you finally get the reveal, and Portia gives the big reveal that, yes, in fact, I have this ring because I was the doctor. Nerissa was the clerk. She also lets it known at this moment that says the 3 of Antonio's ships have come into port, and they are richly laden. Antonio's ships have come home. How fortunate for him. Jessica and Lorenzo are presented with a deed of gift from Shylock that he was forced to write. So they are presented with wealth, and Lorenzo says, "You drop manna in the way of starved people," which of course is an Old Testament reference. And it seems that everybody is satisfied now. They can retire to their rooms. But are they? Right? Are they really satisfied? Because it seems that Nerissa and Gratiano are arguing a bit. We've already seen what may be going on between Lorenzo and Nerissa. Lorenzo and Jessica. And is she really, really happy in this new world? Perhaps not. We see Bassanio now, who's been torn away from his friend Antonio, and Portia has inserted herself as clearly in charge in this relationship. And we see Antonio, who, as everybody exits the stage to retire to their rooms, they pair up and go off. Antonio is left alone. He's kind of the odd man out here. Everyone has someone, except Antonio, which is kind of the way the play began, right? The play begins with Antonio saying, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad, but I am to learn it." And here he gets left at the end of the play, standing alone on stage with no one, and in fact, less than he had before. Perhaps he's lost some dignity back in Venice. He certainly lost the closeness of his friend Bassanio, which can never be the same now that Portia has made it clear. And Antonio is alone, and maybe will return to his state of melancholy that he was in at the beginning of the play. And thus the play ends. It ends happily for the Christians, certainly, right? The Christians win. They win their case against Shylock, and Shylock is destroyed, utterly destroyed, right? He is just utterly destroyed by the Christians. But the Christians triumph, and it is a Christian audience. And there's a marriage. There's 2. There's probably going to be 3 with Lorenzo and Jessica. So it ends with marriages, which is the way the comedies are supposed to end, but just doesn't necessarily feel perfect, right? And there we have Shakespeare playing with the conventions of the comedy, showing the mastery that he has, where he can give us a comedy and make us scratch our heads a little bit, saying, yeah, but it didn't feel quite right. I don't remember laughing a whole bunch until maybe at the end. And even then, I'm laughing at the expense of somebody else in an uncomfortable way. Thus ends the comedy, The Most Excellent History of the Merchant of Venice, which is most certainly a problem play. So thank you for joining me through this video lecture series through the 5 acts of Merchant of Venice. We'll see you next time.